My Uncle Victor didn't laugh. That would have required effort, and Victor never wasted effort on anything that didn't have a dollar value attached to it. He smirked. The precise, controlled smirk of a man who has spent 20 years waiting for his father to die and has just received confirmation that the one person he never bothered to worry about is not, in fact, a threat. A box. Pop left you a box. We were in the offices of Whitfield and Crane, downtown Raleigh, on a Tuesday in February, 6 days after my grandfather Harold Briggs's funeral. 8 people around a conference table designed for 6. The room smelled like coffee that had been sitting too long, and the particular formal silence that only exists in places where families come to find out what the dead thought of them. My grandfather had died on January 31, 2025, at 80 years old in the farmhouse outside Raleigh where he had lived for 43 years. He went to sleep the same way he did everything, quietly, without ceremony, and he didn't wake up. His neighbor found him the next morning when the barn lights didn't come on at 6 o'clock the way they always did, the way they had for 4 decades, the way they would have until the end of the world if Harold Briggs had anything to say about it. The attorney, a man named Whitfield who wore glasses and spoke with the measured precision of someone who has delivered difficult news so many times it no longer reaches him, worked through the will methodically. To my Uncle Victor, Harold's only son, 60% ownership of Briggs Lumber Yard, 4 locations across Wake and Durham counties, annual revenue approximately $3.8 million. Victor had been running day-to-day operations for 15 years. He nodded the way people nod when they receive something they've already mentally spent. To my mother, Lorraine, Harold's daughter, the one who had moved to Charlotte 20 years ago and visited twice a year at Christmas and Thanksgiving, always with a casserole, always leaving by noon, the farmhouse, 260 acres of land outside Raleigh that developers had been circling for a decade, assessed value $2.4 million. To Victor's kids, Brock and Cassidy, Harold's truck collection, 4 restored vehicles including a 1969 Ford F-100 and a 1972 Chevy C10 that a collector had offered $140,000 for 3 years ago, an offer Harold declined without a second thought. They're not for selling, he'd said. They're for driving. Brock and Cassidy exchanged a look that meant they were already thinking about selling. And to my grandson Seth, Whitfield said, and the table shifted the way tables shift when a family has been wondering what the difficult one gets, I leave the contents of the workshop, specifically the item on the workbench. Whitfield has been instructed to present it to Seth at the conclusion of the reading. A wooden box appeared from beside the attorney's chair, 12 inches by 8, joints fitted without nails the way my grandfather had taught me to do them when I was 9 years old, so tight you couldn't slip a playing card into the seam, a small brass latch. My name carved into the lid in the same deliberate script he used for everything, not decorative, just precise. A box, Victor said again. He shook his head with the satisfaction of a man whose expectations have been confirmed. Pop spent 40 years building that business, and this is what he thought of you. My mother said nothing. She was already photographing the farmhouse address on her phone. I picked up the box, put it under my arm, said nothing, and walked out. I opened it in my truck, a 2017 Ram with 90,000 miles on it, parked in a garage on Fayetteville Street, heater running because February in Raleigh is the kind of cold that isn't dramatic enough to complain about but persistent enough to make you miserable. Inside the box, 3 things. First, a key, brass old, the kind that opens something with a real lock instead of a digital panel, no label. Second, a plane ticket, round trip. I noticed that he bought it round trip, Raleigh-Durham to Seattle-Tacoma, departure February 10th, 9 days away. Third, a letter in my grandfather's handwriting, 2 pages, front and back, in the small, careful script of a man who had kept records by hand for 40 years because he trusted his own handwriting more than he trusted computers. He started it the way he started most things, without introduction. Seth, there is a man in Seattle named James Kwan. He has been expecting to hear from you since October when we made our arrangement. The key opens the storage unit at 4417 Cedar Creek Road. Everything inside belongs to you and has for 3 years. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you coming around for the wrong reasons. You never did. That's why I'm telling you now. James will explain the rest. Listen more than you talk. Show up the way you always show up. The others got what they wanted. I'm giving you what I have. I love you, son, not like a grandson, like a son. I hope you always knew that. Pop. I sat in my truck for 40 minutes, read the letter 5 times, looked at the key until it stopped being a mystery and started being a question. Who is James Kwan? What's in that storage unit? And what did my grandfather, a man who resold the same pair of work boots 3 times rather than buy new ones, who ate the same breakfast every morning for as long as I could remember, who measured a good day by whether he'd built something with his hands, have to do with a man in Seattle? Let me tell you who I am, because you need to understand why my grandfather chose me before you can understand what was waiting for me in that city. My name is Seth. I'm 38 years old. I work as a Finnish carpenter, custom cabinetry, millwork, high-end residential renovation. I run a two-man operation out of a shop in Garner, 12 miles southeast of Raleigh. I make decent money when the work is steady. Around $62,000 in a good year, less when it's not. I drive a used truck. I own half a house, the bank owns the other half, in a neighborhood that real estate listings call transitional, which means the coffee shop arrived before the sidewalks did. By every metric my family uses to measure a person, I am the least impressive name at that conference table. Victor is the businessman. He inherited the management of the lumber yard when my grandfather semi-retired, and he has spent 15 years running it the way aggressive men run things they didn't build, by cutting what the original builder built, convinced it's fat. My grandfather built supplier relationships over decades, paid his vendors on time, treated his employees like they were the business because they were. Victor renegotiated every contract the year he took over. He called it streamlining. 2 of the 4 locations had been losing money for 3 years. My mother is what happens when someone decides that proximity to a life is the same as participating in it. She showed up at Christmas and Thanksgiving and called it being close to her father. She hadn't been to the lumber yard in 12 years. She measured her relationship with my grandfather by the number of visits, not by what happened in them. Brock works in something he calls consulting that requires a lot of business trips and produces no visible output. Cassidy manages a social media presence. Good for her. Neither of them had been to the farmhouse in 4 years. And then there's me, the one who showed up on Saturdays to help my grandfather fix the barn roof, the one who drove him to his cardiology appointments when his knees got bad, the one who sat on the back porch with him on Sunday evenings drinking coffee that was too strong and saying almost nothing, because Harold Briggs didn't believe in filling silence with noise. Neither do I. There are 2 kinds of people, he told me once, in the shop, the smell of sawdust and linseed oil thick around us while he ran a hand plane along a piece of white oak. People who build things and people who watch things get built. Neither one is wrong, but you should know which one you are. He was a builder. He knew I was a builder. The rest of my family, I think he loved them the way you love weather. You can't change it, you can only watch it pass. I almost didn't go. That's the truth of it. I held that plane ticket for 5 days without doing anything. I didn't pack. I didn't look up Seattle weather. I didn't do any of the things a person does when they've decided something. I just held it, and I thought about Victor's smirk and my mother's phone already out before the reading was done, and I thought about how the wooden box had no nails, the same joints my grandfather had taught me, the same technique, and I thought, he built this for me to recognize. He knew I would be the only one who noticed. On day 5, I booked a checked bag and looked up the weather. February in Seattle, 50 degrees raining, basically Raleigh, but less certain of itself. February 10th, 4 hours in the air, window seat because I'd never flown across the country before and I wanted to see what it looked like. The Rockies from the air are something that shouldn't exist. Too large, too sharp, like the earth hasn't finished deciding what it wants to be out there. The Pacific Northwest comes in green and wet and serious the way places look when they have nothing to prove. Seattle-Tacoma Airport, 11:15 in the morning. I walked through the terminal with a backpack and the wooden box which I'd carried on because I wasn't willing to check it. Carhartt pants, flannel boots with sawdust still in the laces from Thursday's job. I looked like what I was, a carpenter from Raleigh with no clear reason to be in Seattle except a letter from a dead man he loved. In the arrivals area, a man in a dark jacket was holding a tablet with my name on it. "That's me," I said. He looked at me for a moment, the look of someone recalibrating an expectation. "Mr. Kwan is expecting you. My name is Paul. I'll be driving you." The drive took 40 minutes through downtown and across a bridge into a neighborhood I'd have to look up on a map later. The building was 12 stories of glass and steel facing Elliott Bay, not flashy. Functional in the way that expensive things are functional when the person who owns them doesn't need to prove anything. James Kwan was waiting in a conference room on the 10th floor. He was 71 years old, Korean-American, with silver hair and the settled, unhurried posture of a man who has been in difficult rooms for 40 years and has stopped being nervous in them. Gray sweater, dark slacks, no tie. His hands, when he shook mine, were the hands of someone who had once done physical work and never forgot it. He looked at me for a moment. "You have Harold's hands," he said, "and the way you stand, one shoulder forward like you're about to pick something up." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. I have a great deal to tell you." He sat across from me, 2 cups of coffee, a manila folder, and a framed photograph. Black and white, slightly water-damaged at one corner. 2 men on a job site, sawdust visible on their clothes, both grinning the specific grin of people who have just finished something hard and are still standing. My grandfather was on the left, younger, maybe 45, the same forward lean I knew, like he was always ready to move. The other man was Korean, compact, with the focused look of someone paying attention to everything at once. 1983, James said, September. The framing crew for my first building, a 40-unit apartment complex in Cary. Your grandfather's lumberyard supplied every board. He picked up the photograph, looked at it, set it back down. I came to the United States in 1979, 25 years old, enough English to be misunderstood, $800 and a cousin's address in Durham, 4 years in construction before I saved enough to try something on my own. He paused. In 1982, I went to 12 banks in the Triangle looking for a construction loan. 12. Everyone said no, a Korean immigrant with a business plan and no collateral and a thick accent. This was 1982, you can imagine. I said. Your grandfather wasn't a bank, he was a lumberyard owner, but he was the 13th person I asked. James looked at me directly. He didn't give me a loan, he did something more useful. He extended me 90-day credit terms on materials, $85,000 worth, with no collateral except a handshake and what he saw when he looked at me. He said, "You've got the eyes of somebody who finishes what he starts. Come back when you need the next load." James's expression shifted into something quiet and warm. That project sold out in 3 months. I paid him back in 60 days. He never told me any of this, I said. He wouldn't. Harold Briggs didn't do things for the story. He did them because they were in front of him and he could. That's a rare quality. I've employed many people in 40 years. I've met very few with that quality. What happened after the first project? We became real friends, not the transactional kind that business produces. We talked every week for 40 years. I flew to Raleigh 6 times. He flew to Seattle twice, which for Harold was an act of significant personal inconvenience since he regarded air travel as something that had never been properly thought through. A brief smile. In 2009, my wife became very ill, pancreatic cancer. She was in the hospital for 11 weeks. He paused. Harold drove from Raleigh to Seattle, 2,800 miles in his pickup. He said he didn't want to fly. I think he needed the drive to prepare himself for what he'd find when he arrived. James looked at the photograph again. He sat with me in that hospital for 3 weeks. He didn't say much. He brought coffee in the mornings. He sat. That was all. That was everything. I pressed my fingers against the bridge of my nose and said nothing. After my wife passed, James continued, we made an agreement. 2 old men who had survived things together. Whoever goes first, the other ensures the person who mattered most is taken care of. Not the whole family, the one person. He looked at me. Harold chose you 3 years ago. He told me about you in the summer of 2022 on the phone, the way he talked about things that mattered, quietly, like the words cost something. He said, James, my grandson Seth shows up. Not for what I have. For who I am, he's the only one. He said you'd been driving to the shop every Saturday for 20 years. He said you were the only one there when he had his first cardiac scare. He said you learned to build the way he built, because you wanted to, not because anyone asked you to. I looked at the photograph of the 2 men on the job site, their grins, whatever they were looking at just off camera. What does the agreement mean, I said, practically. James opened the manila folder. Your grandfather was not only my friend. For 40 years he was my most trusted outside advisor. Not for his financial expertise, for his judgment, his read on people, on risk, on when to build and when to hold. I brought him every major decision I made after 1990. He was the reason I didn't overextend in 2001. He was the reason I walked away from 3 acquisitions that would have destroyed us. His capital was patience and clarity. James slid the folder across to me. The agreement specifies that upon Harold's death, I establish a trust for the person he designated. The trust is funded at $22 million. $22 million. My grandfather, the man who had resold the same pair of boots 3 times rather than buy new ones, who drove a 2003 F-250 until the frame cracked, who thought a good dinner was a pork chop and creamed corn at his own kitchen table. He had been the most trusted advisor to a man who ran a construction empire for 40 years and never said a word about it. Not once, not one single Sunday on that back porch. There is more, James said. I'm 71. I've been looking for someone to join my advisory office for 3 years. Not an executive. I have executives, someone with Harold's quality of judgment, his way of seeing projects and people. He looked at my hands. Harold told me you build things that last. That you don't cut corners because you understand that corners are what hold a structure together. I've been in construction for 40 years. I know what that means. He paused. I'm offering you a position. You would learn this business the way Harold learned it. Slowly, by paying attention, by showing up before you had a reason to. You would earn the role. The trust is yours regardless of whether you accept. Harold's provision for you does not depend on my offer. Why me, I said. Analysts, MBAs, people with actual finance backgrounds. I don't want anyone, James said. I want Harold's judgment. He believed it lived in you. He looked at me the way my grandfather used to look at a board before the first cut. like he was seeing the whole thing before he touched it. He told me you understand wood, that you can look at a piece of lumber and see where it will move, where it will hold, where it will fail. He said you learned that from him. He paused. The same skill works on everything, just a different material. I sat in that conference room for a long time after James finished. The light off Elliott Bay was moving across the floor, pale and silver, the way light moves in places accustomed to clouds. I was 38 years old, sitting in a glass building in Seattle, holding information that rewrote everything I thought I understood about my grandfather's life and his estimation of mine. I need time, I said. Of course, but the position requires your presence. You can't do this from Raleigh, and you can't do it by phone. I spent 3 days in Seattle. James arranged a hotel. Nothing ostentatious, just solid and clean. I walked the waterfront, sat by the Sound and watched the ferries move in the fog and thought about a man who drove 2,800 miles for his friend and never mentioned it, not once. I knew my grandfather for 38 years. I sat with him in that shop. I ate his cooking. I listened to everything he chose to say, and not once did he say James Quan or Seattle or any of this. He just taught me how wood moves, how to feel the grain, how the things you build by hand outlast you, and how that is, in fact, the point. On the third day, I went back to James's office. I'll take it, I said. When can you start? I need to finish 2 jobs I'm in the middle of. I don't leave work half done, close the shop, talk to my partner, say goodbye to the farmhouse before my mother sells it. James was quiet for a moment, then he picked up his phone, spoke in a low voice for a minute, and set it back down. My attorney will contact your mother's representative this week regarding the property. Quan Group has acquired rural agricultural holdings in the Carolinas before as part of our portfolio. We'll offer fair market value. He looked at the window. Your grandfather built something on that land for 40 years. It should stay in the family. You are the family. I went back to Raleigh and finished both jobs, a kitchen renovation in North Hills and a built-in library for a professor on the north side. 8 days of clean work, the kind I don't need to go back and fix. I told my partner I was leaving. He took it better than I expected, which made leaving harder. I didn't tell my mother or Victor about the trust, didn't tell them about James or Seattle or any of it. The letter said show up and say little. I followed it. They found out in April. Cassidy was scrolling Instagram and found a post from a Seattle architecture firm, a project groundbreaking, people in hard hats, nobody she recognized. Except in the background, barely visible, there was a man in a Carhartt jacket standing next to an older Korean-American man in a gray sweater. The caption mentioned Quan Group. Cassidy sent it to my mother. My mother sent it to Victor. Victor called Whitfield. Whitfield said Harold's instructions had been followed exactly and he was not at liberty to discuss the specifics. My mother called me that night. Seth, what is going on up there? I'm working in Seattle. Working how? Doing what? Advisory work for a construction company. Silence, the long kind. Which company? Quan Group. Longer silence, the sound of a woman standing in a Charlotte apartment recalculating something she thought she'd already solved. How does a carpenter from Raleigh end up in an advisory role at a construction conglomerate? Pop. Pause. Your grandfather. He was James Quan's closest friend for 40 years. He advised his company. When Pop died, James honored a pact they'd made. Pop chose me as the person he wanted taken care of. He made that decision 3 years ago. I heard her breathing. I heard the particular quality of silence that happens when a person is running arithmetic in their head and the answer keeps coming out wrong. How much, Seth? Of course, not why you or what did he see in you, or I'm sorry I didn't see it too. How much? It's not about the amount, Mom. Everything is about the amount. Pop didn't think so. That's the entire point. He gave you and Victor and the cousins things you could count, a business, land, trucks, accounts. He gave me something that doesn't fit on a balance sheet. And he knew he designed it this way. He knew that you would take the countable things and I would follow the letter. And the distance between those two choices would tell the whole story. What story? The story of who we are. You count things, I build things. He always knew the difference. She didn't answer. I heard her set the phone down on something hard. Victor called 3 weeks later. 2 of the lumberyard locations were in serious trouble. Vendor relationships Harold had maintained for 25 years had broken down because Victor had renegotiated them too aggressively 2 years running. Major suppliers were declining to renew. Revenue was projecting down 18% for the year. Victor needed either capital or new terms, and he had no access to either. Seth, I need to talk about the business. The business is yours, Victor. Pop had relationships I can't replicate. These suppliers, they're saying they want to work with Briggs Lumber but not with current management, whatever that's supposed to mean. It means Pop treated them like partners for 25 years and you've been treating them like line items. Those aren't the same thing. You have connections now through this Quan situation. I have access to relationships that James Quan spent 40 years earning by showing up, keeping his word, and never asking for anything he hadn't built the standing to ask for. I'm not going to spend that on a problem you created. Seth. Figure it out. That's the company you wanted. Run it. I hung up, not with anger, with the particular clarity that comes when you finally understand that the people who smirked at your wooden box are the same people who call when the building is on fire and they realize they never learned where the exits were. It's July now. Seattle in summer is a different city. The gray lifts and what's underneath it is green and absolutely certain of itself. I've been in James's office 5 months. I'm learning. Slowly, the way my grandfather learned everything, by arriving early, asking questions that sometimes irritate the senior staff and sometimes make them stop and think, and by being quiet in meetings until I have something worth adding. James and I have dinner on Wednesday nights. Real dinners, not business ones. He tells me things about my grandfather I never knew. The time Pop talked him out of a bad acquisition in 2001 with a single sentence, "James, you're buying it because it's available, not because it's right." The time Pop flew to Seattle, against everything he believed about air travel, because James had called at 2 in the morning and Pop heard something in his voice and just came. 40 years of small, accumulating faithfulness. The kind that doesn't fit in a eulogy because it fits instead in a life. He talked about you the most, James told me last Wednesday. We were at a place on the water watching a ferry cross through the evening light. In the last few years, he'd say, "James, Seth finished a kitchen this week, sent me a photo. The joinery is perfect." He said it the way a man talks about something he made himself. I had to look out at the water for a moment. He said you understood the most important thing he ever learned, James continued, that the quality of what you build is an argument you make without words. You build it right and the thing makes the argument for decades after you're gone. My grandfather's tools are in a storage unit in Raleigh, the one the brass key opens, his chisels, the marking gauges he made himself, the workbench he built in 1974 that weighs 400 pounds and will never move unless you take it apart to move it. James arranged to have it all shipped up. It's in my apartment now in the second bedroom. I'm building a cabinet, white oak, no nails. The 2 failing lumberyard locations closed in June. Victor is running the other 2 on reduced staff. I haven't spoken to him since April. The farmhouse property is held by Quan Group's real estate arm now. My mother accepted the fair market offer without knowing who was buying it. She had been negotiating with a developer at $1.8 million. James paid $2.4 million. The land is still the land. The barn is still standing. I don't know yet what I'll do with it. I have time. I sit on a bench by the Sound most weekend mornings, where on clear days you can see the Olympic Mountains across the water, white and enormous and completely indifferent, the kind of mountains that exist to remind you that some things were here before you and will be here long after. I drink my coffee too strong the way my grandfather made it. I keep the photograph James gave me, the 2 of them on the job site in 1983, grinning at something off camera in my jacket pocket. Pop gave his family things they could hold and argue about and list on paper. A business, land, trucks, the stuff of estate planning and probate court and family dinners where someone always brings up what someone else received. He gave me a key and a letter and 4 words, "Show up the way you always show up." I showed up, the way I always showed up, the way you show up for the only person in your family who ever looked at you and saw what you actually were, not what you earned or owned or might eventually inherit, but who you were when nobody was measuring. The wooden box sits on my desk. I keep the letter inside it. He signed it the way he signed everything, without performance, without sentimentality, with the plain precision of a man who measured twice, cut once, and was never wrong about where things would hold. Some people collect things, some people build things. He always knew the difference. So did I. He taught me.